The last thing I remember clearly is reaching up to grab my reading glasses off the top shelf of the bookcase. That old oak one my late husband bought at an estate sale in 1987. And then the floor just came up to meet me. I didn't fall dramatically. There was no slow-motion moment where I reached out for something to grab. 1 second I was standing, and the next I was on the hardwood, my right hip radiating something so sharp and hot it didn't even feel like pain at first. It felt like electricity, like my whole body had been plugged into a wall socket. I lay there for I don't know how long. The ceiling fan was on. I remember watching it turn. Around and around I kept thinking, get up. Just get up. You've gotten up from worse. But my leg wouldn't cooperate. It just stayed there at that wrong angle, and every time I tried to shift my weight the electricity came back, worse. My phone was on the kitchen counter, maybe 15 feet away. It might as well have been in another country. I started calling out for my daughter. Then I remembered she didn't live with me. She lived 40 minutes away. I remembered that, and the ceiling fan kept turning, and I thought, well, this is how it happens then. It was my neighbor who found me. A retired school teacher named June who walks her little terrier past my house every morning at 8:30. She'd noticed my porch light was still on. I always turn it off before 7, and something made her try the door. It was unlocked, thank God. I've started leaving it unlocked since my arthritis made the deadbolt hard to manage. My daughter has told me 100 times that's unsafe. Funny, the things you think about on the floor. June called 911. She sat with me on the hardwood and held my hand and said, help is coming, over and over, and I have never in my life felt so grateful for a neighbor, for a small routine habit, for a terrier who needed a morning walk. The paramedics came. They were kind. The emergency room was cold and bright, and they confirmed what I already suspected. Fractured right hip. I would need surgery. I would need it soon. The hospital called my daughter 22 times before I went into the operating room. She didn't answer once. I want to tell you who my daughter is, so you understand what 22 unanswered calls meant. She's 51 years old. She has a good job, senior manager at a logistics company. She has a husband, a man I have always been polite to even when it cost me something. She has a house with a finished basement and a back deck and a Ring doorbell and every modern convenience you can think of. She is not unreachable. She has her phone on her at all times. She has told me herself that she keeps it on vibrate even during meetings. She knew I lived alone. She knew I was 68 years old with osteoporosis that my doctor had flagged 2 years ago. She knew my husband had been gone for 6 years and that I had no one else in this house. 22 calls. I know because a nurse named Delphia, a quiet woman with braided hair and very steady hands, sat with me before they wheeled me in and showed me the call log from the hospital's records. She didn't have to do that. I think she did it because she could see something in my face that she recognized. Something that needed to be named out loud. We'll keep trying, she said. I nodded. They put the mask over my face. The last thing I thought before the anesthesia took me was, where is she? Where is my daughter right now? I found out later. And I want you to sit with that for a moment before I tell you, because I sat with it for a long time before I could say it without my voice changing. While I was in surgery, my daughter was in Sedona, Arizona. She and her husband had taken a long weekend. They'd left Friday morning. This was Sunday. The trip had been planned, she would tell me later, for months. A reset, she called it. A wellness retreat. Yoga at sunrise, red rock hikes, spa treatments, farm-to-table dinners. I found out about Sedona the way I imagine a lot of mothers find out things they were never meant to know. Through a photograph posted publicly on social media. My granddaughter, who is 23 and has always been sweet to me, sent me a screenshot. She'd seen it and thought I should know. I think she was shaken by it too, though she tried to be careful in how she said things. The photo was my daughter and her husband at the resort pool, both of them in the water, both of them with those large fancy drinks. My son-in-law had his arm around her. They were both smiling. My daughter looked relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. The caption read, finally breathing, no notifications, no obligations, just us and the red rocks in God's country. Posted at 2:17 p.m. on Sunday. My surgery began at 11:40 a.m. She had turned her notifications off. She had made a deliberate choice, at some point during that weekend, to silence everything. And when the hospital called and called and called again, when the number showed up on her screen 22 times, she let it go. I don't know if she saw the calls and chose not to answer. I don't know if she had her phone face down on a lounge chair and genuinely didn't hear it. I have turned both possibilities over in my mind like stones, and I'm not sure which one is worse. I was in the hospital for 5 days. Delphia checked on me every shift she worked. She brought me an extra blanket on the second night without being asked, just appeared in the doorway with it folded over her arm and said, "I thought you might want this." I cried a little. She pretended not to notice, which was exactly the right thing to do. My granddaughter drove up on the second day and sat with me for 4 hours. She brought me a crossword puzzle book and a small succulent plant in a terracotta pot. She held my hand and we watched a cooking competition show and didn't talk about her parents much, except once when she said very quietly, "I'm so sorry, Grandma." And I said, "You have nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart." And I meant it. She doesn't. My daughter arrived on the third day. She drove straight from the airport. She came in with flowers, a large arrangement, the kind that's almost too large, the kind that says I know I have something to make up for. She was wearing her airport clothes, rolling carry-on behind her, and she came in and said "Mom" in a voice that was supposed to convey everything, and she hugged me carefully around my shoulder, and I let her. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I was very calm. I've learned in 68 years that the moments that matter most are the ones where you stay very still, where you watch and you listen and you file everything away carefully before you decide what to do with it. She sat in the chair beside my bed and told me she was sorry she'd missed the calls. She said the retreat had had a strict no devices policy. She said she hadn't realized the hospital would need to reach her so urgently. She said she would have come immediately if she'd known. I listened to all of it. Then I said, 22 calls, sweetheart, from a hospital. About your mother? She said, I know. I said the resort had a no devices policy, but you were posting photos. There was a pause, long enough to mean something. She said, that was just one photo. Grayson posted it from his phone. I looked at her, my daughter, who I had raised alone for the first 8 years of her life while working 2 jobs. My daughter, who I had driven to every school play and every orthodontist appointment and every heartbreak. My daughter, who I had quietly, privately funded through a rough patch in her late 30s without ever once mentioning it to another soul. I said, I'm tired, sweetheart. I think I need to rest. She stayed another hour. She got me ice chips and asked if I needed anything and stood in the doorway on her way out and said she'd be back tomorrow. I said okay. She left. I lay in the hospital bed and stared at the ceiling and thought, I was the no devices policy. I was the thing she turned off. I came home to a house that felt different, not different in any visible way. My garden was still out front, a little worse for the week I'd been gone. June had watered it once, which was kind. The oak bookcase was still there with my reading glasses on the floor beside it. The paramedics had left them, I suppose, and no one had thought to pick them up. I put them back on the shelf. I stood there for a moment with my hand on the wood grain. I was using a walker. I would need it for at least 6 weeks. Physical therapy 3 times a week. My movements were slow and deliberate, and every morning required more planning than I was used to. I had to think about where things were before I needed them. I had to stop and rest in the middle of tasks I used to do without thinking. My daughter came over twice in the first 2 weeks. Both times she stayed about an hour. Both times she seemed slightly distracted, slightly somewhere else, the way you are when you're mentally drafting your next email while talking to someone. She tidied my kitchen counter once, unnecessarily. She asked if I was seeing my physical therapist. She said she'd look into meal delivery services. She did not ask how I was sleeping. She did not ask what it had been like to lie on the hardwood floor alone. She did not ask what I thought about at 3 a.m. when the pain woke me up and the house was very quiet. I started to see things clearly in those quiet weeks, the way you sometimes see things clearly after you've been sick, all the usual noise stripped away, just the essential facts. The essential fact was this: I had been waiting for my daughter to show up in a way that she was never going to show up. Not because she was cruel. Not because she didn't love me, whatever that meant to her, but because I had made myself available, made myself accommodating, made myself easy to set aside. I had called when she seemed busy. I had kept visits short so I wouldn't impose. I had never once said what I actually needed because I didn't want to be a burden. I had trained her, without meaning to treat me as optional. My husband and I had purchased this house in 1982. We raised my daughter here. When he died, she had offered, once, to have me move in with them. I had declined. I didn't want to uproot my life and I didn't want to live under the same roof as her husband, who has always made me feel like a guest overstaying their welcome. I'd made that work for 6 years. I'd built a life in this house alone, and I'd been proud of that. The house was mine, outright, paid off years ago, worth significantly more now than it was then. I had a financial planner named Gerald, a steady, careful man who I'd been working with for 11 years, and a lawyer who had drawn up my will and estate documents when my husband died and updated them twice since. My daughter knew about the house. She knew about the savings account. She knew, in the general way that adult children know these things without ever discussing them directly, what she stood to inherit. What she didn't know was what I was thinking about during those quiet evenings, when I sat with my tea and my walker beside me and watched the light change in my garden. About a month after I came home from the hospital, my son-in-law called me, not my daughter, her husband. This had happened maybe 4 times in 20 years, so I noticed. He was very pleasant. He asked how my recovery was going. He commented on the weather. Then, after a few minutes of this, he mentioned that they'd been thinking about their living situation, that the commute had gotten long, that they'd been looking at some properties closer to where she worked. He mentioned casually that if I ever decided the house was too much to manage alone, the upkeep, the stairs, the size, they'd be very interested in talking about options. Maybe they could work something out, keep it in the family. I listened to all of this. I said, "That's thoughtful of you. I'll keep it in mind," he said. "No pressure, of course." I said, "Of course not." After I hung up, I sat very still for a long time. Then I called Gerald. "I want to be clear about something because I think it matters. I didn't make the decision I made out of spite. I didn't do it to punish anyone. I did it because I looked at the evidence in front of me. A hospital call log, a poolside photograph, 2 one-hour visits, a real estate inquiry, and I made a rational decision about who I could rely on and who I was building my life around. The answer was me, just me." I spent 2 weeks talking to Gerald and to my lawyer. I thought about it carefully. I slept on it many times, and then I made some changes. I am donating a substantial portion of my estate to the pediatric ward at the hospital where I had my surgery. Delphia works on that ward sometimes. I thought of her when I decided. I thought of the blanket. I also decided to sell the house, not to my daughter and her husband, not to anyone I knew. To a young couple, teachers, as it happened, which felt right, who made a fair offer and who walked through the rooms and said they wanted to start a family here. I stood in my kitchen while they looked around and I thought of my husband and I thought, yes, this is a good thing to do with this house. I told my daughter the week after I signed the papers. She called me within 20 minutes of receiving my letter. The conversation was long. I won't give you all of it, but I want to give you the part that I keep coming back to. She said, "Mom, I feel like I'm being punished for one mistake." I said, "You're not being punished. I'm making decisions about my own life and my own resources. Those are different things," she said. "We could have worked something out. About the house. You didn't give us a chance." I said, "Your husband called me about the house 3 weeks after I got home from surgery, after 22 calls from a hospital that you didn't answer." There was a pause. She said, "I explained that. The retreat." I said, "I know what you said. I heard you." Another pause. She said, "I don't understand who you've become." And I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the hardwood floor and the ceiling fan and the 22 calls and the poolside photograph and the 1-hour visits and the son-in-law's very casual, no-pressure phone call. I thought about 6 years of making myself small so no one would find me inconvenient. I said, "I think I've become someone who knows what she's worth." She didn't have a response to that. We said goodbye quietly. She hung up first. I live in a condominium now. 3rd floor, with an elevator, which is practical. There's a small balcony where I've replanted some of my herbs in containers. The rosemary made it, and the thyme, and a lavender that's doing surprisingly well in a glazed pot. I can see a park from the balcony. In the mornings I drink my coffee there and watch the dog walkers and the joggers and the occasional child being pulled along by someone in a hurry. June texts me sometimes. She sends photos of her terrier. I send back a thumbs up and sometimes a little dog emoji. It's become our thing. Delphia and I aren't friends exactly. She's decades younger and we live different lives. But I wrote her a letter after I made the donation to explain why I'd chosen that ward. She wrote back. A short note handwritten on hospital stationery. She said she remembered me. She said she'd known. "My granddaughter visits me here. She has her own key. She comes on Saturday mornings sometimes, and we do the crossword together. And she doesn't talk about her parents, and I don't ask. And we just sit there in the morning light and do the crossword and drink the coffee, and it's enough. It is more than enough." My daughter and I speak occasionally. There is a careful distance between us now, like furniture arranged around a space where something used to be. I don't pretend the distance doesn't exist, but I don't fill it with false warmth either. We are civil. We are what we are. I think about the floor sometimes, the ceiling fan, the 15 feet between me and my phone. I think about how long I lay there waiting for someone to come. And I think about how I got up eventually, how I always have. How it turns out that the getting up was always mine to do. If you are lying on that floor right now, not a literal floor, maybe, but one of those invisible ones, the ones where someone you love has stopped picking up, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to stop waiting for them to answer. You are allowed to make decisions about your own life that don't account for people who've already decided you're optional. It's not too late to be someone who knows what they're worth. It was not too late for me.